Good evening and welcome to the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen Landmarks Lecture Series. My name is Victoria Dangle. I am the Executive Director of the General Society. For those of you not familiar with our organization, we were founded in 1785 by the skilled craftsmen of New York City, artisans who represented 22 different trades. At that first meeting, there were blacksmiths, carpenters, saddlers, tailors, and silversmiths, among others. Today, our 229-year-old organization continues to serve the people of the city of New York through its educational and cultural programs, including our tuition-free Mechanics Institute, the General Society Library, and our century-old lecture series. The magnificent space you're in this evening is the library of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen. It was founded in 1820, and it's the second oldest library in New York City, and one of the three remaining libraries that circulate. Our book and periodical collections span more than 2 centuries, and they are suited to both scholarly research as well as recreational reading. Our archives date back to 1785. The General Society extends its sincere gratitude to the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, as well as Bauer&Dean Publishers for their support. And now, our program director, Karen Taylor. Thank you.
Good evening. I want to add my thanks to Victoria's, that we are all delighted you could be here this evening, particularly those of you for whom this is your first visit. Before introducing Lisa Easton, our speaker tonight, I want to particularly thank New York Landmarks Conservancy for their support in promoting tonight's event. I also want to remind you that after the lecture, there will be a short wine and cheese reception, which we'd be delighted if you could stay for. I'm especially delighted to introduce our speaker, Lisa, this evening, because not only is Lisa tonight's speaker, she's also curated the 4 landmark lectures. Lisa Easton, AIA, is a partner in New York City-based architecture and historic preservation firm Easton Architects, and tonight we'll discuss the Gould Memorial Library that is the jewel in the crown of architectural masterworks designed by the premier Gilded Age architect, Stanford White. Lisa Easton has worked on the restoration of some of New York's metropolitan region's most noteworthy landmarks and has developed a reputation in the field as an expert architect, planner, and historian. She received the Lodgers Monetary Grant from the Getty Foundation for her work at Bronx Community College, as well as multiple awards from national, state, and local grant programs. Ms. Easton teaches at Pratt Institute Center for Continuing and Professional Studies. She lectures extensively at state and national conferences and serves on numerous nonprofit boards promoting the integration of preservation and architecture. I am so pleased to introduce Lisa Easton to you.
Good evening. So tonight's lecture is about Stanford White's University Heights legacy. And as Karen had just mentioned, we received a grant from the Getty Foundation, and she referred to it for Bronx Community College, which is completely accurate. The University Heights campus was actually originally constructed for NYU, and it is now under the ownership of CUNY and is now Bronx Community College. So through this grant, myself and my firm were introduced to, for the first time, this wonderful collection of buildings. And for me, it's a personal journey when I have the opportunity to share what I learned about this beautiful complex with anyone who would choose to listen. So when I had the opportunity to lecture, I really thought that it was such a great example to include here in the Landmarks Lecture Series. So with that, I will begin. I think I will. There we go. The University Heights campus is a tour de force of Beaux-Arts-influenced American Renaissance architecture. Stanford White, of the renowned firm of McKim, Mead & White, designed the campus for the New York University in a bucolic setting on a bluff in the Bronx overlooking the Harlem River and the Palisades beyond. NYU's desire for a more spacious and architecturally unified campus followed important design trends for academic institutions of higher learning at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th. Although White's master plan was never fully realized, the strength and importance of the design still reads clearly in the centerpiece of the rotunda and flanking buildings, completed between 1894 and 1912. These were the core of the conception and known as the Stanford White complex. The appointment of Henry Mitchell McCracken, whom you see here on the left, to lead NYU set the stage for the transformation of the university in 1891. McCracken was a Presbyterian minister and writer who in 1881 became professor of philosophy and chancellor of the Western University of Pennsylvania at Pittsburgh, now the University of Pittsburgh, prior to joining NYU. By November 1890, NYU, under the influence of Vice Chancellor McCracken, was seeking a new site for expansion of its programs. McCracken believed the growth of commerce in Washington Square area was detrimental to the advancement of education, and that the undergraduate school should be moved to an undeveloped area easily accessible to the downtown campus. In the time since NYU's move to Washington Square, New York City had grown significantly, with a mid-century population around 800,000 in Manhattan alone. The developed portions of the city now stretched beyond 42nd Street, and wealthy residents continued to drift northward to escape the noise and congestion, leaving the once elegant neighborhood around NYU crowded with tenements and slums. NYU was also hamstrung by weak finances. As a relatively young institution without any religious affiliation, for example, Columbia's association with Trinity Church, NYU lacked funding sources available to other schools, making expansion in the increasingly expensive Washington Square area virtually impossible. Furthermore, McCracken believed a move by NYU further uptown would fulfill, more nearly, as he put it, the American ideal of college. With the new campus, McCracken wanted to emphasize physical training and athletics and wanted space for residence halls, libraries, and laboratories. He felt students should enjoy a country environment, yet to be able to study close at hand to the great city. Stanford White, whom you see on the right, a native of Manhattan and son of music and drama critic Richard Grant White, began his architecture career as a principal assistant to the renowned American architect Henry Hobson Richardson from 1872 to 1878. White subsequently studied architecture informally in France, and upon his return to the United States in 1879, joined Charles McKim and William Rutherford Mead to form McKim, Mead & White. By the 1890s, the firm became the preeminent Beaux-Arts practitioners in the United States. McCracken was central to the decision to hire the architecture firm of McKim, Mead & White for the new NYU campus. And the choice of Stanford White for the University Heights campus design demonstrated NYU's aspirations, but also the confidence of Chancellor McCracken. During the design and construction, McCracken took an extremely hands-on role in overseeing the project, working directly with Stanford White to ensure his personal vision for the campus was realized. NYU was founded in 1831 as the University of the City of New York by a group of prominent residents desiring to create a university where access to quality education was based on merit, not status or class. The original campus was located inside an old almshouse near City Hall, which the school occupied free in exchange for a handful of scholarships. NYU relocated to a new Gothic Revival building by Town and Davis, facing Washington Square in Greenwich Village in 1835. At the time, the neighborhood was fashionable residential area outside of the bustling city center, which was still located further downtown. For the first 50 years, the university remained a relatively small institution with fewer than 100 students. When McCracken became the chancellor of NYU on June 11, 1891, he immediately took an option on a 40-acre property in the Bronx owned by merchant and NYU alum H.W.T. Malley. The choice of land was highly praised by the local press, with the Morning Advertiser noting, "No college in the country will command a more interesting landscape," and the New York Herald observing that the choices of land was unequal for picturesqueness. The lofty site contained a fort during the Revolutionary War, controlled alternately by the American and British forces, which allowed easy oversight of traffic on the Harlem River. After the war, the Archer family acquired and farmed the land until 1857, when it sold the northern portion to Mr. Malley and the southern portion to Justice Schwab. During 1891 and 1892, McCracken focused on fundraising for the establishment of his new campus on the Malley Tract. Among the many people he lobbied was Helen Miller Gould Shepard, daughter of Jay Gould, and an NYU alumna herself. She became the primary donor, and in 1892, NYU bought the first 18 acres of the Malley estate and later would purchase the additional tracts of land northeast of the campus. Around the time of the initial land purchase, NYU retained McKim, Mead & White to design the campus and primary buildings with Stanford White as the principal for the project. White's early design ideas for the University Heights campus included a symmetrical group of buildings flanking a central library, which you see right here. So this is the Harlem River, exists over here. This is north, actually. It's a deceiving map. It's oriented down. But the site plan itself was generated in this format by the firm of McKim, Mead & White. His early design ideas for the University Heights campus included this symmetrical group. When the University Heights campus opened on October 1st, 1894, the plan included the Hall of Languages, which you see here, the first completed component of White's design, Butler Hall, a residence hall, was in an existing house on the Malley estate. A gymnasium was a converted stable, and the athletic fields, and a scattering of temporary buildings. So Language Hall is what we see as starting the master plan, seeing the envisionment of the master plan. So I should note that the University Heights campus is the entity as a whole. There's a collection of buildings that have been listed on many levels as a landmark, both in New York City. We have an interior landmark in the Gould Memorial Library itself. We have the exterior of the Gould Memorial, the 2 classroom buildings in the Hall of Fame, and we also are listed on the state and national register for these 3 it's actually 4 buildings that you see before you. So this image is important to clarify what has become known as the Stanford White complex. So we have the campus and we have the complex. So here you see, this is the Gould Memorial Library, a very Pantheon-like structure. This branching arm around it is the Hall of Fame for Great Americans. The academic building to the left is Hall of Languages, the first building constructed, and this would become the Hall of Philosophy. You'll see as we move later through the presentation, Language Hall was constructed in 1896. Philosophy would not be realized until 1912. There's an 18-year discrepancy between the full gamut of Stanford White's vision coming to life. The genius of White's design lay both in the exquisitely detailed architecture and in the interplay between the formal and natural landscapes. Situated on the west side of the main quadrangle, the Gould Memorial Library, Hall of Languages, and Hall of Philosophy, and Havemeyer Laboratory comprised an ordered, axial, and hierarchical ensemble that was an expected and essential part of contemporary campus design. The land drops down dramatically toward the river behind these buildings, and White planned the Hall of Fame for Great Americans, the first facility of its kind in the United States to take advantage of the steep topography. The open colonnade on the top of the Hall of Fame provides a permeable connection between the Gould Memorial Library and the Hall of Languages and Philosophy, heightening the interplay between the formal built environment and the natural environment beyond. White's handling of the architecture and the landscape of the University Heights campus stands in clear and pleasing contrast to his partner Charles McKim's concurrent design for Columbia University, which was both more subdued architecturally and more rigorously ordered on its Morning Heights site. The nationally significant complex includes the Hall of Languages, Havemeyer Laboratory, the Hall of Fame of Great Americans, and the Gould Memorial Library. The importance of the academic architecture and planning comparisons, I think, are unique in that the firm of McKim, Mead & White was simultaneously designing 2 schools, major schools, institutions in New York City, in the 5 boroughs, but also around the country. At the firm of McKim, Mead & White, Charles McKim served as the principal styler. the style setter for the firm. His work can be classified as monumental and academic, with a strong focus on organization. William Rutherford Mead was known for his practical manner and office managerial role. Stanford White, the best known of the three, was famous for his love of the good life and his tremendous energy, producing more work than either of his partners. His social adeptness also landed the majority of the firm's commissions for private houses from Rhode Island to New York's Fifth Avenue. White's approach to design style was exuberant and romantic, not as refined or strict as colleague Charles McKim. In Richard Guy Wilson's McKim, Mead & White Architects, Wilson describes Stanford White's design style in comparison with Charles McKim's, who also began his career under Richardson, stating, "While White stayed longer with Richardson than did McKim, he seemed to have been less affected. His personal style never attained the solidity and consolidation that united McKim and Richardson. It may be the common Beaux-Arts background that directed both McKim and Richardson towards an architecture of weight and gravity. White, on the contrary, remained tied to a pictorial vision of architecture, dazzling surface effects of light, texture, color, and ornament. With McKim's skillful restraint, White's controlled flamboyance, and Mead's overarching pragmatism, the firm held the recipe for extreme success in American design." Shortly after NYU publicly revealed its intention to purchase the Malley estate, Columbia University announced its plan to acquire the tract in Morningside Heights and move the entire institution uptown. Like NYU, Columbia's new campus was located in an undeveloped area with dramatic views north of Manhattan's commercial center. The financial strain of having two major New York educational institutions simultaneously constructing entirely new campuses led to discussions by their respective administrators and potential donors, one might think, about a merger in order to better utilize donation monies. The two options initially considered were a federation or a merger. NYU preferred the former, where control would be divided by the two universities. Columbia, however, desired the merger. Tensions grew, and McCracken suspended all communication with Columbia for 7 months before finally deciding that NYU should remain a separate entity. He argued that the city could maintain two separate and competing facilities with zeal and friendly rivalry. And throughout the deliberations between NYU and Columbia, McKim, Mead, and White had continued with the design of the two campuses, as it was thought that any merger would be administrative rather than physical. The resulting campuses, White as the principal for NYU and McKim for Columbia, are distinct masterpieces of Beaux-Arts planning and design. McKim, Mead, and White played a major role in the creation and popularization of American Renaissance design, an architectural style rooted in Beaux-Arts tradition. Proponents of American Renaissance design believed that the United States was experiencing a cultural awakening and sought to convey that through buildings inspired by earlier periods of monumental classicism and neoclassicism. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago firmly declared the relevance and validity of the American Renaissance for contemporary architecture and planning, as 27 million visitors experienced the wonder of the White City. Involved with the development of the World's Columbian Exposition, and having already established their prowess for monumental Beaux-Arts works, such as the Boston Public Library, which was recently completed at the time, they were the leaders in the dissemination of American Renaissance. Both the Gould Memorial Library and Lowe Memorial Library were the centerpieces of their respective campuses. Both engaged with them in very different ways. White's University Heights campus was a pastoral one, with the principal buildings grouped at the western edge of the campus, and where the land dramatically drops off, providing stunning views of the Hudson River and the Palisades. Although they were intended to architecturally define the campus's open spaces, the organization of buildings was also subservient to the stunning landscape. Charles McKim's Columbia University campus was much more austere and urban than White's design. It was a denser collection of buildings linked by terraces and plazas, much of which were hardscaped. Where the exquisite detail of White's Gould Library exhibits classical splendor, the restraint and ponderousness of McKim's Lowe Library evokes neoclassical grandeur. Indeed, the two libraries are good representations of the design character of their two respective designers. Columbia's library, sedate and severe in its monomaterial limestone, as compared to the subtly varied colors and greater delicacy of White's Gould Library. As the campuses were the output of a single firm, neither of them were likely conceived in a vacuum. Indeed, White once remarked in an interview, "No member of our firm is ever individually responsible for any design which goes out from it." Still, the campuses simultaneously produced by McKim, and White for NYU and Columbia are as much testimony to the individual brilliance of Stanford White and Charles McKim as project principals as the collective skill of the renowned and versatile Beaux-Arts firm. And the two libraries are illustrative of the influence of the two respective dynamic university presidents, Seth Lowe of Columbia and Henry Mitchell McCracken of NYU. The design of both campuses focused on a domed, centrally planned library, while the high-profile construction of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., a domed, centrally planned building, was nearing completion around the time of McKim, Mead, and White's twin campus commissions as a monolithic individual composition. It would not have had much direct influence on the design of these two university libraries. But rather, it was likely the rotunda of Thomas Jefferson's library and centerpiece building of the University of Virginia that provided the general inspiration for the projects. Although White's library for NYU was more clearly derivative, the rotunda was undoubtedly on White and McKim Mead's minds even before it burned in 1895. And intriguingly enough, the firm was hired in 1896 to reconstruct the dome, in which White was the lead designer. The similarities between the Morningside Heights campus and the University Heights campuses go beyond the centrally planned domed library structure and include the design, scale, and architectural vocabulary of the academic and residential buildings which complete their campus plans. So here's a comparison on the left of the Hall of Languages at NYU's campus, and on the right is Avery Hall at Columbia. Very similar in detailing and scale, and here are the drawings created for each of the buildings respectively. So the cultural landscape. The landscape, as you are hearing, is a very important factor, whether it's the urban landscape of the Morningside Heights or the very rural landscape of the University Heights campus. We have a unique experience here in that some of the greatest landscape hands actually worked on, at some point, the design or redesign of the master plan for University Heights. After Stanford White's death in 1906, McCracken's retirement in 1910, NYU secured the services of the famed landscape architectural firm, the Olmsted Brothers. And they were joined by architects Frank Miles Day and Charles Clowder to assist in the continued implementation of the master plan. Olmsted recommended the new campus master plan, creating a nearly continuous line of buildings along the north and east edges of the property, necessitating the relocation of the main athletic fields. He also called for the development of a men's dormitory and small green quadrangle space to the east, enlarging the quadrangle to the west, and connecting the spaces along the library access. Stanford White designed the Gould Residential Hall in 1896, which is located on the east campus, the far side of the athletic field. This is the only building realized this far out in the plan. The hall remains today. It's the only building as part of the second quadrangle that was completed, and it was the first residential building completed, and it now serves as classrooms and offices. No longer serves as a residential hall. Olmsted was instrumental in advising the placement of many small-scale elements in the campus landscape during his early consulting years. During the mid-19-teens, Olmsted designed various plans for the university focusing on the overall spatial quality of the site, with the emphasis on integrating additions to the Hall of Fame and designs for regrading the intersection of Sedgwick and the Hall of Fame Terrace. In 1916, Olmsted's design ideas included changes to the Great Lawn in front of the Gould Memorial Library, which you see here on the left, by expanding it to the east and west and narrowing it to the north and south, and align the access drives with the centers of the Hall of Languages and the Hall of Philosophy. These are different designs than were implemented by Stanford White, whose design plan was augmented by the work of Calvert Vaux. Although Olmsted worked with the university for over a decade, very little of his designs were implemented. The components that remain in evidence include the plantings on the steep slope to the west of the Hall of Fame, which are really quite mature if you were out there today. And the corner, he was able to regrade and make an intersection and connection with the community at the corner of Sedgwick where it meets the Hall of Fame terrace. Both of these have little impact on Stanford White's historic core design. The campus today. The continued importance and primacy of the main quadrangle and its centerpiece building to Stanford White's composition has been reinforced over time by its full enclosure by later buildings. Meister Hall stands to the east of the Havemeyer access, is right here, slightly back from the quadrangle. It was constructed in 1967 and was part of Marcel Breuer's expansion of the campus to the south in the late 1950s and 1960s. Except for Meister Hall, Breuer's group of sculptural concrete buildings, some of which are identifiably brutalist in execution, are located slightly below the grade elevation of the Stanford White complex and include Colston Hall, Begrich Hall, and Polwetchik Hall. It was intended in White's campus plan to have two buildings on the east side of the main lawn, which would frame an open space opposite the library. So in White's scheme, this axis would continue through. So this was the residential building, the only residential building of his plan that was completed. He identified an axis to connect the two with a building that would go here and a building that would go here. That was never realized. Establishing the dominant east-west axis between the library and the second smaller quadrangle at the eastern end of the campus. Except for the Gould Hall, the smaller quadrangle was never constructed. As there was no longer an obvious need for unifying this axis, in 1953, NYU constructed a single building across the east side of the principal quadrangle, which is this building you see here, which is known as the Roscoe Brown Student Center. It was built in 1953 and designed by Eggers and Higgins. Originally a symmetrical composition, the main entrance of the Student Center aligns with the entrance of Gould Memorial Library. So there was an attempt that the entrance here would make a play across campus to the original historic campus core. But that was altered when the addition was put on about 10 years later. So this is the campus today. You can see it's filled in quite heavily by different eras of construction. So the first building, main building of the Stanford White complex, is the Gould Memorial Library. Completed in 1900 and modeled on the Pantheon in Rome, has long been recognized as one of the finest examples of the work of Stanford White and McKim, Mead, and White, and was the focus of the overall campus scheme. The large dome building is designed in an eclectic classical revival style and features an impressive portico on the main entry facade, the east facade, with 6 Corinthian columns of Indiana limestone. The exterior elevations of the building have Corinthian pilasters of limestone set against yellow Roman brick and Milliford pink granite used in the walls. The windows are set into the bays created by the pilasters and are detailed with molded jambs and full entablatures. By creating shallow side and rear wings and a deep front wing, Stanford White relieved the grandeur of the design, allowing it to be more fully engaged rather than dominate the natural landscape. The cornice on the dome is detailed with a terracotta frieze of garlands and pendants. The roof of the dome rises from the cornice, covered in copper tiles, to the richly decorated oculus. The classical forms of the exterior of the library are freely interpreted to make a bold architectural statement which simultaneously blending with the romantic setting. The exuberance of the building's exterior is far surpassed by the dramatic spaces and sumptuous detailing of its interior. The building is centrally planned with a modified Greek cross plan. A large round-domed reading room occupies the center of the plan with shallow arms extending outward, encompassing offices and other support spaces on the north, south, and west, and the top landing of the monumental stairway on the east, rising from the entry portico up to the grand reading room. The space containing the stair extends to the east of the centrally planned building and is opulently finished with a coffered barrel vaulted ceiling, Renaissance Revival architectural detailing, which is rendered in marble and massive wall sconces, stained glass, marble stair treads, and bands of red, yellow, black, and white mosaic floor tiles add to the material richness of this entrance hall. The upper stair landing, east arm of the Greek cross plan, features a shallow dome featuring a round piece of green Tiffany stained glass from which a glass globe lamp hangs. From the landing, one can catch a tantalizing glimpse of the reading room beyond. The expansiveness of the rotunda reveals itself slowly as visitors pass through the stair hall doorway. The original administrative offices are located on either side of the stairway and contain handsome wood paneling and fireplaces. The rotunda is a magnificent and dramatic Beaux-Arts interior, rising 4 stories to the spring line of the coffered dome. The dome is supported by 16 green Connemara Irish marble columns, which rise from bases of white Vermont marble that are capped by Corinthian capitals covered in gold leaf, applied by the Tiffany Decorating Company. The columns support a full entablature ornamented by a Greek fret band, a bracketed cornice, and a carved frieze. Above the entablature of the colonnade is a balcony with plaster railings and classic openwork patterns set between pedestals, and each pedestal supports a classic female figure from Greek mythology. The back wall of the balcony features Tiffany stained glass mosaic panels and forms the drum of the low coffered dome. The coffers diminish in size as they move towards the central oculus. On the rotunda floor, directly below where the original stained glass oculus sat, a glass panel floor serves to allow light down into the auditorium below. Each of the Corinthian columns that decorate the rotunda is echoed by an engaged fluted column at the wall. The floor between the 2 colonnades is laid with panels of white, yellow, and black marble. Bookcases line the bays, behind which are seminary rooms and book stacks, entered from the book doors or hinged sections of the bookcase. The rooms located in the alcoves surrounding the rotunda are notable for their function and innovation. Each academic department was assigned one and an adjoining section of book stacks. This allowed the head professor more access to available books on the subjects and provided a home base for the students to meet with their department head. Above the first level in each alcove are book stacks with floors having glass panels set in a cast iron armature, allowing light to filter down through the lower levels, from the roof through the floors to the very bottom. It was a very, very exquisite design. McCracken was particularly interested in the design of the Gould Memorial Library, frequently making suggestions for improvements and rejecting some of White's ideas. In a 1901 letter, McCracken provided White with a list of his many ideas to incorporate in the design, including the removal of column supports on the balconies, the use of disguised book doors, so the hinged book doors were actually McCracken's idea, to access the rooms behind, and the installation of Tiffany panels as a partition between the reading room and the alcove rooms, and the enlargement of the windows in the skylight above in the dome. Beaux-Arts training emphasized the importance of tradesmen and artisans, very appropriate to our setting tonight, in the development and implementation of a complex master plan. And White's background allowed him to orchestrate the fabrication of many architectural elements and pieces of artwork, from windows, lamps, and interior details by Tiffany to bronze sculptures by Augustus St. Gaudens. The type of management also extended to innovative structural components, such as the vaulting by Rafael Guastavino. A Spanish builder, Guastavino introduced and popularized a centuries-old vaulting technique common to Spain that utilized self-supporting arches composed of interlocking terracotta tiles in offset layers using a very tenacious cement to form a thin shell. The resulting shell was both lightweight and fireproof, and with its elegant and graceful spans, also attractive. Guastavino's arrival in New York coincided with the beginning of the Beaux-Arts-inspired American Renaissance style of McKim, Mead, and White, and they quickly aligned themselves. In many of McKim, Mead, and White's buildings, Guastavino is a prominent commission. Guastavino tilework is found in some of New York's most prominent Beaux-Arts buildings, just to name a few: Grand Central Terminal, Grant's Tomb, and Carnegie Hall. Just to name just a few. There's many, many. The auditorium, located directly below the rotunda level and original to the Stanford White design, appeared historically, as you see on the left. A few character-defining features include the oculus laylight panel and the tripartite Tiffany stained glass window on the west wall behind the stage. The space was destroyed when a Molotov cocktail exploded during a Vietnam War protest on the campus in the 1960s. The space was destroyed. The fire smoke destroyed the central glass oculus, and the floor to the main rotunda, as did the tripart Tiffany window. Marcel Breuer had a hand in dividing the space into several lecture rooms. In the 1990s, the auditorium was restored to White's original design intent, with the exception of reintroducing the oculus, as well as recreating the Tiffany stained glass. So this is what you'd see today. And you can see the evidence of where the glass was, and it's an iteration of what a tripartite window might look like there. And this is actually an image we found that the stained glass that was used here at the University Heights campus was actually, it was a Tiffany stained glass window, and it was a second production of a window that's in a church in Rhode Island. So we actually have the documentary evidence of what the window would look like if they wanted to recreate it. In 1919, a group of artists and patrons was organized to memorialize Stanford White. He died in 1906. The committee was headed by architect Thomas Hastings. It was decided that the memorial should be a pair of bronze doors to be placed at the entrance to Gould Memorial Library. White's son, Lawrence Grant White, designed the door with 8 panels, each with a symbolic figure cast in relief to represent aspects of Stanford White's life and career. The panels were cast by sculptors who had worked with Stanford White in his lifetime. Andrew O'Connor created panels with the themes of inspiration and generosity. Philip Martini created panels with themes of architecture and decoration. Herbert Adams created panels with the themes of painting and sculpture. And Adolph Weinman created panels with the themes mosaic and drama. The decorative lion heads on the doors were created by artist Ulysses Ricci, and the door pulls were created by the artist Janet Scooter. The Hall of Fame. A desire to cover the Gould Memorial Library's exposed concrete retaining walls along the steep hill of the rear facade led to the development of the Hall of Fame for Great Americans. Stanford White's semicircular arcade design for the Hall of Fame, which was completed in 1900, makes dramatic use of the site drop-off, hugging against the rear of the Gould Memorial Library. The structure is unified by its eclectic Roman style and monumental scale, featuring a promenade from which commanding views unfold. The open-air colonnade contains the bronze busts of noted scientists, writers, educators, and other leaders who contributed significantly to American culture. Below the busts sit bronze tablets designed by Louis Comfort Tiffany, containing the name, birth, and death dates, and a memorable quote from the person commemorated. The Hall of Fame is constructed of Milliford pink granite and Indiana limestone with a ceiling of segmented vaulted Guastavino tiles carried on columns and piers. It is 630 feet in length and approximately 10 feet wide. Wrought iron gates were added to the colonnade of the Hall of Fame in 1929 by the Philadelphia artist Samuel Yellen. Another example of the collaboration between White and McCracken occurred when an issue arose regarding the visibility of the massive retaining walls supporting the west side of the library. White suggested creating a terrace colonnade to conceal the walls, and McCracken responded with a proposal to use the colonnade as a Hall of Fame for Great Americans. Though not originally intended in the scope of the university campus design, the Hall of Fame brought much importance to the University Heights campus and was a particularly fruitful result of White and McCracken's teamwork. The Hall of Fame for Great Americans, located in the colonnade behind the library, played an important role in American culture for many decades after its dedication in 1901. Tapping into a special moment in the adolescence of America, the Hall of Fame was the first of its kind in the United States and provided Americans with a tangible symbol of the distinguished men and women of their country. The purpose of the Hall of Fame was not to mourn the passing of heroes, but to inspire the living by encouraging a deeper understanding of those American men and women who had made significant contributions to human welfare. Not only were political leaders and military heroes to be acclaimed, but also artists, scientists, humanitarians, and others deserved of enduring recognition for their achievements. A writer for The Atlantic mused in 1997 about the impetus behind the Hall of Fame, stating, "The Hall of Fame promised for the first time to launch Americans into the orbit of universal immortality. In a sense, it was the vehicle of our validation, and people took it very, very seriously. For a while, the term Hall of Famer carried greater cachet than Nobel laureate, and a hilltop in the Bronx seemed to many the highest spot in the country, if not the world." When the Hall of Fame was created, a set of rules was established for the process of electing the nominees. The university invited suggestions for eligible nominations from the general public. Names were chosen from the suggestions every 3 years by a college of electors, consisting of approximately 100 men and women of distinction, representing all sections of the country. The original electoral college included 25 college presidents and educators, 24 professors of history or science, 23 publicists, editors, or authors, and 28 justices. Election to the Hall of Fame required an affirmative vote by the majority of the Electoral College. Dedication of the inductees occurred every 5 years, and the bronze tablet with the name, the birth date, and the death date with a notable quote were set at the dedication ceremony. It was not until 1914 that nominee qualifications were extended to include foreign-born citizens. Sorry about that. 29 people were elected to the first selection of the Hall of Fame. Among those named were John Adams, John James Audubon, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Benjamin Franklin, Abraham Lincoln, and George Washington. These were commemorated in the Hall of Fame with bronze tablets by the Tiffany Studio. Prior to 1922, however, only 2 bronze busts were executed for the inductees. Horace Mann, placed in 1907, and Robert Fulton, placed in 1909. So in 1922, a campaign was launched to create busts for the remaining inductees and all future ones. These have been designed by many of the nation's outstanding sculptors, including Daniel Chester French, Frederick MacMonnies, and Augustus St. Gaudens. There are 98 busts total in the Hall of Fame right now. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is the most recent and was dedicated during the 1992 Democratic Convention. The Hall of Fame quickly achieved incredible popularity with newspaper publishers all over the country using their editorial page to lobby for or against nominees, while groups like the American Bar Association and the Daughters of the Confederacy waged campaigns to get their candidates elected. Over time, the popularity of the Hall of Fame waned, and funding to maintain it, to continue the election and induction process, decreased. However, it is a significant integral part of White's design and remains so in the 21st century campus. Below the exterior open-air colonnades is the Hall of Fame Museum, a series of gallery spaces for exhibitions on the honored Hall of Famers, unified by a semicircular passageway. So when it was part of NYU, this was actually a museum of works of art or science or anything that was associated with any of the inductees. Today, the corridors leading from the galleries to the auditorium feature buff-colored brick walls and the Guastavino ceiling tiles. The Hall of Fame exists much as it did when it was first constructed, remaining true to its original design intentions. The lower galleries, however, are mostly vacant, and the only real use they have are for storage, and mostly for movie sets. The colonnade's northern end was extended to terminate in line with the front of the Hall of Philosophy. This is how it exists today, and this is one alteration that was not foreseen in the Stanford White plan. I show this image. We talked a bit earlier about Olmsted's role on the campus. He was really very dedicated to discovering an appropriate way to introduce an addition to the Hall of Fame. Even in 1901, they realized that the size of the colonnade was going to be limited to how many people could be inducted. So how could we propose additions that would sensitively embrace the landscape plan? This is one of Olmsted's ideas, and I show it because it really is quite a unique idea. This one is, he's proposing a separate pavilion right here. So this is the Hall of Fame coming around, and he's terminating it in a temple-like structure. And this was going to be dedicated, one of the big contentions about the Hall of Fame elections, where there weren't very many women elected. So he was dedicating an entire temple to the future women electees. I found that interesting. So the Hall of Fame conveys the formality of White's design, as well as its relationship with view sheds to the west over the river. Although completed 18 years apart, as I mentioned earlier, the Hall of Languages in 1894 and the Hall of Philosophy in 1912. So here you're seeing Havermeyer Laboratory, Hall of Languages, Gould Memorial, and you see the wrapping of the Hall of Fame. So it was finished, it just ended in space without its ending building of philosophy, which you see here. Finished in 1912. All designed by Stanford White as a matched pair of flanking buildings for the library. The former to the south and the latter to the north. They are identical in design and symmetrical in plan. The two buildings have simple rectangular masses, approximately double cubes, with low-pitched roofs, skylights in their attics. They are both clad with a distinctive yellow Roman brick and trimmed with Indiana limestone and terracotta finishes. Copper alloy and bronze detailing articulate the roofs and cornice lines and the main entrances to the buildings. The windows of the ground floor level are set upon a Milliford pink granite belt course with brick arches at their headers. Second floor windows have stone sills in place of the belt course, and the third floor windows are set on a stone belt course with brick arches as their headers, similar to the ground level. However, here the windows are framed in stone and embellished with terracotta garlands. The cornices on both halls are decorated with 2 rows of dentils and elaborate cresting and antefix. Both buildings feature Ionic porticos over their main entrances with full entablatures rising to the height of the third floor belt course. Behind the portico columns are porches with 3 arches on the rear wall framing the main entry doors and side windows. Both halls are approached from a series of grand stairs. When the Hall of Philosophy was built 18 years after the Hall of Languages, some alterations in construction were made. For example, the roof of the Hall of Philosophy was designed as a steel structure as opposed to the wood frame structure of Hall of Languages. In addition, the floor structure is composed of concrete arches, not hollow terracotta as in the earlier buildings. The Hall of Philosophy and Hall of Languages remain true to their original purpose, housing classrooms, offices, computer laboratories, a faculty lounge and conference room, with centrally located stair halls for vertical access. Select interior spaces in the halls are detailed in a variety of fine materials. Havemeyer. The Havemeyer Laboratory, designed by Stanford White, was completed in 1895. It was situated to the southeast of the Hall of Languages on the south side of the quadrangle. The materials mirror those of the Hall of Philosophy and the Hall of Languages, with the straw-colored Roman brick facades accented with terracotta, limestone, and marble. The building is rectangular in massing, 7 bays wide and 4 bays deep, with a low hip roof embellished by a dental course. So here's Havemeyer. You're seeing the rear of it behind the captain's house. The building is rectangular in massing and 7 bays wide. The main set of double doors is supported by a transom having a decorative grille. Doors and transoms are contained within a tabernacle frame. Today, Havemeyer Lab contains language immersion classrooms and offices. So the University Heights campus, Stanford White's legacy, then and now. So on the left, this is the picture that is actually misstated. That should be 1912. And on the right, this photo was taken in 2005 when we were doing our grant research. So you'll see in a moment, we're going to see, well, we saw it actually earlier. This, unfortunately, has the naming of NYU on the entablature, and this is just a sign. Since it's now Bronx Community College, they wanted to have their own library. So that's really the only change, completely reversible. Then and now, so this is a 1920s aerial photo. You see this beautiful picturesque collection of the Stanford White complex, the axial connection that he envisioned across the campus to connect to the residential building. So here, these are bandstands. They're structures to support the athletic field, temporary structures. And then here you're looking at a very recent aerial photo taken about, I think about 3 months ago. And you'll see a very noticeable difference, not only to the plan I showed you earlier, where you see some of the Marcel Breuer infill around the campus, but here this is the first new building on the campus since its ownership change from New York University to CUNY University. And it is a building that was designed by the firm Robert A.M. Stern's office. And it is a very large building, but in terms of its materials, it's a very appropriate choice of materials and scaling for the buildings it's having a conversation with on the campus. And the one thing I noticed, I struggled with this for a long time, because in my opinion, the building is fine, but where it's sited, I have a little bit of difficulty with, because it really impedes on Stanford White's vision. It really impedes on that quad being an open space wrapped by his beautiful collection of Renaissance-style buildings. However, and going through my notes again, when Olmsted proposed a change in the 19-teens, his landscape vision was actually to move the drives. These are called the access drives. So there was a big access drive that went around and across, and then this was a pedestrian thoroughfare that connected academic buildings. And Olmsted had envisioned that the access drives should be moved to be on center with those 2 flanking academic buildings. So in the end, the new Stern building does in fact honor that vision. The University Heights campus exemplifies the finest of the Beaux-Arts influenced American Renaissance tradition and is an exceptional illustration of Stanford White's work at McKim White. The Gould Memorial Library, the Hall of Fame for Great Americans, the Hall of Languages, and Hall of Philosophy, along with Gould Hall and Havemeyer Laboratory, form a unique architectural ensemble. With the push to move the NYU campus to the Bronx, the University Heights campus exemplifies the trends of early 20th century campus planning. Moreover, the Hall of Fame for Great Americans at NYU's University Heights campus retains its own significance due to its importance to the American culture of the period. Today, the University Heights campus is home to Bronx Community College and had grown significantly since the construction of the Stanford White complex and the layout by McKim White. Most notably, their vision was completed by 1920. Since then, there has been an addition of numerous buildings in various architectural styles and configurations. However, the integrity of the original design remains strong. The statuesque Gould Memorial Library, flanked by the Hall of Languages and the Hall of Philosophy, remains sited adjacent to a grass lawn and tree-lined alley, allowing the buildings to retain the sense of their original campus design. The White-designed ensemble continues to serve as the architecturally distinguished centerpiece of the campus, and the buildings comprising the University Heights campus and their siting on the main quadrangle at the edge of the bluff maintain a high degree of integrity and clearly convey the significance of the original design.